I want to talk about Call of Duty first. I played it. I wasn't going to buy it because I'm like, I'm not going to spend $60 on a game that all I really want to play it is for the campaign. The reviews came out and people were, or the critics were kind of like, it doesn't really achieve what they in the press, the Call of Duty folks, were saying. They were trying to make something that felt like the Hurt Locker, and they were trying to make a video game that felt nuanced and really got you to question America and just sort of your views of war. And it was supposed to be emotional. And I was like, oh my God, if they can pull this off, that sounds amazing. And so the reviews came out and all of them pretty much said, yeah, they didn't do that. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to spend the money. And then I'm like, somebody, I don't know if it was Hogwash or not, but somebody on my Twitter said, well, why don't you just go rent it? And I'm like, oh shit, I can go down to the fucking grocery store and rent the thing on the Redbox. So I rent the thing on the Redbox and I brought it home last Friday night and I adored the campaign. I played it all in about 2 days. It was about 8 hours of gameplay. I thought it was phenomenal. And I wanted to talk about it. And it had nothing to do with what the developers were talking about in regards to, oh, this is like a playable version of the Hurt Locker. It wasn't any of that. Am I going into spoiler territory? Only briefly, but not, I mean, it's, okay, let me get this out of the way and then you can listen if you choose to. There's so little to spoil because ultimately it is a traditional Call of Duty campaign in that it's not like you're like, oh my God, this story is incredible. I didn't know that Captain Pierce actually had a long lost child that ended up coming. I mean, it's none, I'm making that up. None of that was in there. It wasn't that kind of game. What I loved about it was the variety. It's like one of the things I complain about with games like Uncharted, even though I always praise to the moon and back the execution of Uncharted, is the sameness of the moment-to-moment gameplay and the gunplay. So it's like, we've improved our gunplay. This is Uncharted or a game like that or Assassin's Creed or whatnot. And it's just like, how many of these same shooting encounters can we dole out to the player over and over and over before we have to do something different? Call of Duty campaign, I would have to go back and map it out on a chart, but I don't think every time I had a combat encounter in that game, it was either a major shift in sort of scenario design or it was minor but meaningful. So every single time I had gunplay in that game or anything to do in that game, it was something fresh, it was something different, right? So the variety and the variedness of the campaign was incredibly strong. Really cool ideas. I mean, and this is spoilery, I guess, but I mean, it's like, it's kind of like spoiling Mario by telling you there's a part in the game where you get a hammer and you smash barrels. I mean, it's not like I'm spoiling like, Luke is Vader's kid, right? But like, everything from just like a really cool new, like when they give you the sniper weapon and you have to take into account bullet drop, wind, and then they throw at you after you learn that cars that are coming at you that you have to shoot out the engine blocks before the cars get there. It's not like, oh my God, that's amazing. But it was very fresh given where it fell in the campaign. There are times they let you take over remote control airplanes, just like little airplanes you control with an RC control, and those have TNT strapped to them, and you have to fly those into helicopters and blow up the helicopters, right? It was like every single moment was something interesting. And then the writing, I'm going to praise the writing and the cutscenes. And if you followed me or watched my streams or read my tweets or anything like that, I'm not a big cutscene fan, and usually writing in video games I think is like, oh, it tries so hard to be a fucking movie. What they did in the writing, when I say the writing, and again, I guess this is spoilery, so cover your ears just for a moment, but it's not really. It's not the kind of game you can spoil. But it's the scenario writing of Call of Duty. It's the fact that there was like an attack on an American embassy in some foreign country that's made up. And maybe this has been in a movie. I've never seen this. The idea was, the bad guys are invading the embassy. You're going into the embassy to try to get out the ambassador and his assistant and also catch a bad guy. And the way they level design that embassy is they have this bulletproof glass that runs along areas of it. So you're in one section of the embassy. The bad guys are on the other side of the bulletproof glass, killing innocents, killing children, and total just like embassy workers and shit. And you can't get to them and they can't get to you. But as you're shooting and defending on your side of the embassy, you're seeing all of this happen. Now, it's not like, oh my God, it's heart-wrenching. It's more like, I've never seen in a movie or a TV show or a video game, the idea of a shootout happening where you've got this bulletproof glass in between the action and that's playing off each other. That was a really fresh take. There was a moment, I guess they ripped off from a movie. I haven't seen this movie though, where you're on top of a building and you're having to fire flares up into the sky to light up the field. And only when the field is lit up can you see the enemies that are approaching. And once the flare fades out, it's dark, but the enemies keep coming. So it's like almost like a zombie movie where you're having to keep lighting up the field, running back to the mortar to light the field up to take the guys out before the light goes away. So it's just a lot of really good scenario moment-to-moment gameplay that I thought was just, it absolutely kept my attention from start to finish. The cutscenes, you know how I feel about cutscenes, but let me tell you something. The cutscenes in this game were not these typical, I want to be a filmmaker, but I'm not very good at it, so I'll just kind of make my C-level movies and pat myself on the back and have gamers just give me all kinds of adulation. The cutscenes were actually really good, and not because they were good storytelling. 98% of the cutscenes were like this very slick heads-up display user interface of like maps and satellite photos and drone photography, and it was showing you sort of how all these missions fit together. It almost felt like something more like an Jason Bourne movie. And so it was less about, let us now tell you our story and let us make you fall in love with our characters and all that crap. And it was just more like, shit, it's really cool to learn the history of this story or of this campaign in this incredibly visually fresh, almost like the opening of a high budget action movie with, you know, where they have the credit sequences like in a James Bond movie. That's how their cutscenes were done 98% of the time. So all of these things came together. I thought it was great. I thought it was fucking fantastic. I would say definitely in my top 5 things I've played so far this year, which I never thought I would say about a fucking Call of Duty game. Are you out of your fucking mind? The stuff that really, I won't even say fell flat. The stuff that I had zero response to was the stuff that they were lauding and that they were talking about and saying, oh, this is what really makes this game special, which was, let me just kind of show you some of this stuff briefly. If you're looking at your screen, I uploaded this the other night when I was playing. This is a sequence where you play this girl, and again, if this is spoilers, I'm sorry. I don't really think you can spoil this kind of game. It's not like a Marvel movie where you're like, wait a minute, what do you mean, you know, Tony Stark does this at the end of Avengers and shit? It's just kind of not that kind of game. But anyway, you are a girl named Farah. You're like 8 or 9 or 10, and this is your brother. You're moving through some rubble. I'm assuming this is meant to be emotional or something, okay? Check this out.
Brother, I need to go.
So here's a dead kid. I guess I'm supposed to go like, oh my God, they're killing children. And I'm just like, okay. And again, I'm not going, okay, like, oh, I'm heartless. Like, I don't give a shit they're killing children. It just didn't land. It just felt like you were going through a haunted house at Halloween time. And this was just like the set of the torture scene that you go through. You weren't really playing it and going, wow, I'm affected. And then, you know, to add insult to injury, if the dead kid didn't get you, check out what's over here.
We have to go through here. It isn't fair. They just kill everything.
Yes, including the dog. Oh no, there's a whimpering dog. Like, again, and I kind of thought because it was Naughty Dog, I kind of thought because it was those guys, at least some of those guys had come over from Naughty Dog to work on this game. I kind of assumed that they would bring some of the storytelling chops that they have with that studio. But it's like somebody in the chat is saying they didn't, I think it was Stefan, they didn't work to make you care. Here's a scene, and again, this will spoil it for you, I guess. Here's a scene where a Russian soldier kills the father of Farah, who will be one of the playable characters later in the game, who's like a freedom fighter. Watch this, okay?
Okay.
So the bad guy comes in the door. That's the father of the brother and the father, and Farah. So they're fighting. If you're listening, the dad and the soldier are fighting. The dad picks up a knife, and then the soldier basically kicks him up against the wall and kills him. Okay, so he shoots him there. And now the father's dead against the wall, right? Okay, so now now in the chat, Apathy is Death says, that's a shame. I really wanted to try it. I'm telling you, this is one of my favorite campaigns and one of my favorite pieces of gameplay that I have played all year. You should absolutely try it. There's nothing... I loved this game. I didn't play the multiplayer, but I loved the campaign. I'm just pointing out that a lot of the stuff that didn't work seemingly was the stuff that I think they thought was going to be evocative and powerful. So in this case, here's the dead dad, but it's like Stefan says, they didn't earn it. This is the first time you've ever met the father. He hasn't, like that dog in the alley, they haven't done anything. It wasn't like that was the family dog, and there were flashbacks like throughout the game up until that moment where you had a moment with the dog that you really liked the dog, or there wasn't like a little mini game where you and your dad went to get ice cream and your dad, stop some bullies from picking on you or anything like that. And then when he dies, you're like, oh, I really like that guy. He's just some random NPC kind of character. The last thing I'll show you is similar. The thing that's been getting a lot of talk about this game is this, which is the waterboarding sequence where your character is captured and you get waterboarded. And again, I mean, waterboarding and torture is absolutely on the forefront of conversations about how do we get information out of enemies? Is it what America should be doing? Although this is not America, this is the Russians. But ultimately, it should be something that's handled with reverence and care and an understanding and all of that stuff. Okay, this is what it is. They have your character tied to a chair. The bad guy comes over, interrogates you. You tell him whatever you want, but ultimately he has his buddy waterboard you. Right? This is what it looks like. You answer him. It doesn't. I don't think it matters what you say.
Protecting him. Protect yourself. I've been patient with you. No more. Stay awake, and you might see your brother one last time.
Okay, so
He's gonna give you a drink. Try to breathe.
So they pour the water, and all the gameplay is you move the stick to avoid the water, and when the water is away from you, you press down the stick to take a breath, right? So, I mean, that's what the gameplay is. And yeah, Fool Killer says the scene was kind of funny because of how goofy and arcadey it is. I didn't think it was funny, but what I thought was it was totally uneventful. It didn't work at all as gameplay where you were like, oh my God, I feel like I am totally in this experience. I feel like I'm having some kind of emotional response. I'm struggling with the politics of all of this. It just kind of felt like, okay, whatever. So again, I thought this game was great. I loved it. It'll be on my top 10 list of 2019 in terms of the campaign of Call of Duty. But it was weird because it was not for any of these reasons. Now, the last thing I'll say about it was kind of neat to see, of all places, Kotaku actually call this out. Kotaku basically wrote an article saying that it didn't really earn any of this stuff. And I got to say, I know there's a lot of shit going down with Kotaku. I know a lot of people don't like Kotaku, and that's fair. But I thought this was pretty fucking cool because it's cool to see, not just with this game, but with Death Stranding, it's cool to see the press, at least in my opinion, starting to push back against a lot of these claims a lot of games make these days of being important and meaningful, and that they're trying to say something that really is important. And it's kind of cool to see the press go, yeah, but you're not really succeeding at that. You're saying you're doing that, and it's clear you think you're doing something important, but ultimately that's really not what is happening. And I think that can only be good for the industry. I will say this, they don't call it out as much in other games yet. I'll be curious if The Last of Us Part 2 gets a pass, because I thought The Last of Us Part 1 was also loaded down with a lot of this. We're trying so hard to be meaningful and important, and it just kind of came off as false. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, and that's fine, but I'll be curious if this is a trend in the gaming press that continues, because it's certainly, when we get to Death Stranding in a little bit, you certainly see that today with a lot of people starting to go, this is kind of pretentious and kind of fucking weird. Okay, let me go to the chat. When I decided to study game design at university, says Stefan, I believe the gaming would be this new revolutionary medium for storytelling. I agree with you now. Not surprising, says Stefan. I decided to become a filmmaker. I mean, yeah, let me tell you something. If you are, it doesn't matter how old you are, but if you're talking about getting into university, if you are considering what you want to do with your life in terms of getting a degree or just learning on your own and teaching yourself, and your end goal is to tell stories and move people and make people emotional or affect people through storytelling, 99% sure video games is not the medium for you. The only way video games would be the medium for you would be if you are so clear on how you think you can do that through the interactive medium. Because think about it, if you're a genuinely great storyteller, why would you go to some medium that hasn't figured out how to tell stories well in it, and it may never, when you've got books and TV and movies and you can make a shit ton more money and you can reach a shit ton more people with your stories, why would you go to video games? So you better be sure, you can always change, course, but you should try to be sure that you're choosing interactivity for a real proper reason as the medium in which you want to tell stories. Jonathan says, is Call of Duty Modern Warfare worth getting for just the campaign? Well, yes, but again, I wouldn't pay for it. I mean, I rented the thing. I went out to Redbox and I rented it for $7 for 3 days, and I enjoyed it so much that I finished it in 2 days. So is it worth it? Yeah, but I wouldn't spend any kind of real money on it, even though it's great, because you're only talking about 7 hours. So you're going to spend $60? $60 for 7 hours seems a little high. I mean, I guess it's like a movie ticket, right? $10 an hour. It's kind of close.